The late autumn wind of 1894 cut through Sweetwater's market square like a dull blade, carrying the scent of dried grass and horse manure. Red dust settled on faces like a thin layer of powder, turning everyone the same earthen shade regardless of their station. Caleb Grant led his stubborn young horse through the crowded lanes, past vendors hawking everything from cured leather to questionable tonics. The animal, barely broken and still wild at heart, jerked against the lead rope at the shrill whistle of a locomotive arriving at the nearby depot. Its sudden lunge sent it crashing into a flour wagon, toppling several sacks that burst open on impact. "Watch where you're going." The woman at the wagon turned, cast iron pan still in her grip, dark eyes flashing with irritation. Isabella Santos stood barely 5 feet tall, but her presence filled twice that space. Flour dusted her worn calico dress, adding white streaks to the patches already there. Caleb's face flushed red as he struggled to control the horse, which now threatened to demolish the entire stand. The crowd gathered, some laughing at the spectacle of a supposed horseman unable to manage his mount. Isabella sized up the situation quickly. Setting down her pan, she approached Caleb with a sly smile. "Play along," she whispered, then raised her voice for the crowd. "My husband," everyone graceful as always. The laughter shifted from mockery to good-natured amusement. The flour merchant's scowl softened slightly at this apparent domestic comedy. Caleb caught on, ducking his head sheepishly. "Sorry, dear," he mumbled, playing the part while finally getting the horse under control. "I'll replace the flour and fix your wagon wheel." A drunk card sharp stumbled forward, leering at Isabella. "Pretty thing like you deserves better than this clumsy cowboy." Caleb stepped smoothly between them, not raising a fist, but simply loosening the horse's lead enough for the animal to stretch its neck toward the man. The drunk scrambled backward, suddenly sober enough to fear being bitten. Once the crowd dispersed, Isabella pressed a warm cornbread into Caleb's hand. "Payment for playing guard dog," she said, "though if you really want to make amends, my cook wagon stove needs fixing." Caleb tipped his weathered hat. "I'll be there." As he turned to leave, Isabella called out with a grin, "Don't be so serious, cowboy. I'm no lady." Caleb paused, and for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile tugged at his lips. "Ma'am." They parted ways in the drizzling rain, the town blurring behind veils of coal smoke and dust, yet both glanced back, as if by accident. That night, Caleb returned to his drafty cabin outside town. By lamplight, he mended an old saddle, his hands steady and sure despite their size. The work was methodical, peaceful, the leather speaking a language he understood better than most conversations. Isabella wheeled her cook wagon to the edge of the camp where the freight haulers gathered. She stoked the fire, preparing the evening meal for the crew, while her mind wandered to the quiet horseman with gentle hands and a horse with kind eyes despite its wildness. Inside Pike's saloon, Benjamin Pike watched through the window, cigar smoke curling around his thin smile. Beside him, Cornelius Morgan, wrapped in his signature beaver coat, studied the street with calculating eyes. "The Santos woman," Morgan said, not really asking. "Had a contract with her old man before he died." Pike replied, "Gambling debts. She thought working kitchens would clear it, but—" He shrugged, letting the implications hang like smoke. Morgan's smile was sharp as winter ice. "The railroad's bringing civilization. Pike can't have valuable assets wasting away over cook fires when they could be earning on stage." Outside, the late train's whistle split the rainy darkness. The west teetered between the yellow glow of lamp-lit windows and the vast darkness beyond, a beginning both romantic and ironic, both sadly comic and genuinely troubling. Isabella had seen men like Morgan before, men who viewed people as possessions, contracts as chains. She'd buried her father 6 months ago, but his debts lived on, documented in Pike's careful handwriting. The papers sat hidden in her trunk, but their weight pressed on her constantly. She'd learned young that the West promised freedom but delivered complications. Her mother, gone when Isabella was 12, had taught her to cook for 20 mouths with a handful of beans, to sing through smoke and leering faces, but most importantly, to say no and mean it. The rain intensified, drumming on wagon canvas and wooden roofs alike. In the saloon, Morgan and Pike concluded their business with a handshake that would ripple through the coming months like a stone in still water. Caleb finished his repairs and stepped outside. The prairie stretched endlessly under the low clouds, and somewhere beyond the town's edge, coyotes called to each other a lonely sound that matched something in his chest. Tomorrow he'd fix a cook wagon stove, a simple task, straightforward and clean. He didn't yet know that some fixes, once started, changed the shape of a life entirely. Isabella banked her fires for the night and crawled into her wagon. Through a gap in the canvas, she watched the stars appear briefly between racing clouds. The wind rocked the wagon gently, and she hummed softly, not a saloon tune, but something her mother had sung, about rivers and mountains and finding home. In Sweetwater, the night settled like dust on a still day, covering everything equally, the righteous and the wicked, the hopeful and the desperate, the beginnings of love and the machinery of greed already in motion. Dawn broke cold over the freight camp, frost glazing the wagon wheels. Caleb arrived with his toolbox, breath visible in the crisp air. He found Isabella already awake, coaxing heat from damp wood. "Coffee," she offered, pouring without waiting for an answer. The tin cup warmed his hands as he studied the broken stove. Years of buffalo hunting and army scouting had taught him to fix what needed fixing: saddles, wagons, sometimes people. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, realigning the chimney pipe that had worked loose. "You were a scout," Isabella observed, not questioning. Caleb nodded, focusing on his work. 10th Cavalry. Before that, hunted buffalo till there weren't many left to hunt." He touched his shoulder unconsciously, where an old scar ran deep. "Got turned around in a sandstorm once. Led a patrol wrong. Good men paid for my mistake." "We all got mistakes," Isabella said simply, refilling his cup. The truth about Caleb was written in his economy of words and movement. Orphaned by pneumonia at 15, he'd learned early that survival meant usefulness. Now he trained horses, hired out during cattle drives, saved every penny toward a piece of land near Willow Spring, a sweet water source he'd marked on a hand-drawn map folded in his shirt pocket. He lived by simple rules: keep your word, pay your debts, protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Justice wasn't found in law books, but in the steady application of right action. Every morning, black coffee and a few verses from his worn Bible. Though he never preached, faith, like everything else in his life, was private and practical. Isabella watched him work, recognizing something familiar in his careful movements. She'd grown up along the railroad lines, daughter of William Santos, a man whose love for cards exceeded his luck. She'd learned to stretch a sack of beans to feed 20 workers, to hold a tune in a smoky saloon without losing herself, to smile when she wanted to spit. "My mother died when I was 12, she said, surprising herself with the confession. "Taught me cooking and singing, but mostly taught me to stand on my own feet." After her father died, she'd tried to buy her freedom with honest work. Pike had other ideas. Holding papers that claimed more than money claimed her voice, her presence, her future. The contract lay hidden in her trunk like a snake, coiled and patient. The camp stirred around them. Teamsters emerged from tents and wagons, drawn by the smell of Isabella's cooking. She moved efficiently, frying bacon, stirring beans, kneading biscuit dough, her hands never still, her movements a kind of dance. "You're good at that," Caleb said. "Have to be?" She didn't elaborate, but her tone carried years of necessity. The morning sun climbed, revealing the hard beauty of the high plains. Wind-swept grass stretched to every horizon, broken only by the dark line of the railroad and the scattered buildings of Sweetwater. This was contested ground ranchers, farmers, and railroad men all claiming their piece. Water rights tangled as barbed wire. Isabella saw how Caleb looked at the land, the same way she looked at an empty stage with fear and longing mixed. They were both running towards something, running from something else. "Heard Cornelius Morgan's buying up water rights," she said carefully. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Man like that sees water as money, not life. Everything's money to men like him." Isabella's voice carried an edge sharp as the morning air. A commotion near the main road drew their attention. 3 riders approached Morgan's men, badges gleaming, though everyone knew they were hired guns playing at law. They dismounted near the cook wagon, spurs ringing. "Miss Santos." The lead man tipped his hat mockingly. "Mr. Pike's wondering when you'll honor your obligations." Isabella's spine straightened. "I'm working. That was our agreement." "Agreements changed. Mr. Morgan's interested in your talents." Caleb stepped from behind the stove, wrench still in hand. He didn't threaten, didn't posture, just stood there solid as a fence post and about as movable. "Ladies working," he said quietly. "Breakfast is 2 bits if you're hungry. Otherwise, road's that way." The gunmen laughed, but something in Caleb's stillness made them nervous. Men who'd faced charging buffalo and hostile war parties carried a different kind of danger, not hot but cold, not reckless but certain. "This ain't over," the leader promised Isabella, but they mounted up and left. Isabella's hands shook slightly as she returned to her cooking. "You didn't have to?" "Yes, I did." Caleb went back to the stove, tightening the last bolt. "That's fixed. Should hold through winter." Their eyes met across the small space. "In Isabella." Caleb saw a courage he admired, not the absence of fear, but action despite it. In Caleb, Isabella glimpsed something she'd thought extinct: strength without ownership, protection without possession. "I'm not some princess needs rescuing," she said firmly. "I know." He packed his tools methodically. "But everyone needs someone to stand with them sometimes." The day warmed slowly. Around them, the camp buzzed with preparation for the trail. These were the working poor freight haulers, immigrant laborers, former slaves seeking new lives, people caught between the grand ambitions of men like Morgan and the simple need to eat. Isabella served breakfast to them all, knowing their names, their stories. Caleb saw how they looked at her, not with the hungry eyes of saloon patrons, but with genuine respect. She'd built something here, a small circle of dignity in a harsh world. "There's talk of Morgan damming part of Willow Spring," Isabella mentioned as Caleb prepared to leave. "Charging for what God made free." Caleb's face darkened. "Over my dead body." "Might come to that." She wasn't joking. He studied her, this small woman with flour in her hair and steel in her spine. "You know something about fighting men like Morgan." "I know running doesn't work. They follow." Her fingers unconsciously touched her throat, where a high collar hid old bruises. "I know giving in doesn't work either. They take more." "So, what does work?" Isabella smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Finding others who won't run or give in, making a stand together." Caleb nodded slowly. In the army, he'd learned that battles were won not by heroes, but by ordinary people choosing to hold their ground. Looking at Isabella Santos, he saw someone who'd been holding her ground alone for too long. "I'll be around," he said simply, "if you need anything." Just like that. Just like that. As Caleb walked back toward town, leading his now calm horse, Isabella watched him go. He moved like a man who knew where he was headed, even if the path wasn't clear. She'd known plenty of men who promised protection, usually wanting payment in return. But Caleb Grant had fixed her stove and stood with her against Morgan's men, asking nothing but coffee. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the plains, both felt the shift in their separate worlds. The stakes were set, the players revealed. In Sweetwater, Morgan and Pike made plans over whiskey and cigars. On the prairie, Isabella sang quietly as she prepared for tomorrow's meals, her voice carrying across the camp like a promise. And somewhere between town and open range, Caleb studied his hand-drawn map by firelight, tracing the blue line of Willow Spring. Water meant life out here. Men would kill for it, die for it. But maybe, with the right people standing together, they could keep it free. The coyotes called again as stars emerged, their song wild and defiant. The West was changing, railroads and money reshaping ancient patterns. But some things endured: the need for water, food, shelter, the need for someone to stand beside you when the powerful came calling. The need for home, however a person might define it. The widow Victoria Harrison's white mare had thrown a shoe and developed a limp. Caleb arrived at her modest homestead as morning mist clung to the grass. Finding Isabella already there with a basket of corn cakes and fresh coffee. "Figured you'd need feeding," Isabella said simply, pouring him a cup while Victoria's children Samuel and little Mary pecked around them like curious chickens. They worked together in easy rhythm, Caleb examining the mare's hoof while Isabella taught the children to cut patches from flour sacks for a quilt. Small acts, but in them the seeds of trust took root. 2 days later, a grass fire sparked by locomotive cinders threatened the eastern pastures. Caleb spotted the smoke first, spurring his horse toward the freight camp where Isabella was preparing lunch. Without words, they joined the bucket brigade, Caleb beating flames with his duster while Isabella hauled water from the nearest well. The acrid smell of burning grass filled their lungs, smoke and cinders dancing like hellish snow against the purple sky. Beautiful and terrible, Isabella gasped between buckets, watching the fire line advance and retreat. "Most things out here are both," Caleb replied, soot streaking his face. At Chang's general store, run by elderly Frederick Chang, who'd come to build railroads and stayed to build community, they traded beans and flour. Chang spoke of bandits harassing the Chinese laundry workers, stealing what little they earned. "They come at night," Chang said quietly. "The law looks away." Isabella listened intently while Caleb studied the old man's tired face. "I'll ride by after dark," Caleb promised. "See what I see." That evening, as purple dusk settled over Sweetwater, they found themselves at the freight camp where Samuel Washington, a black cowboy working the fall roundup, played his banjo. His music transformed the work camp into something almost magical, notes floating up like sparks from the cook fires. "You know why horseshoes ring different on frozen ground?" Samuel asked, fingers never stopping their dance on the strings. "Each season's got its own music, if you listen close." Isabella laughed a real laugh, not the practiced one from her saloon days. Caleb felt his shoulders drop their usual tension, allowing himself this moment of peace. On Sunday, they rode to the hillside overlooking town. A herd of pronghorn antelope bounded past, dust rising like silver mist in the afternoon light. Caleb pointed to cracks in the earth, explaining how drought worked slow and patient, like poverty or injustice. "See how the grass grows shorter near those cracks?" he said. "Water table's dropping. Come summer, folks will be fighting over every drop." Isabella understood the larger meaning. "Morgan knows this." "Course he does. Man like that plans 3 moves ahead." She taught him to make red chili stew with dried peppers, the heat building slowly on the tongue. He showed her how to oil leather properly so work gloves lasted longer. Small exchanges, but each one closing the distance between them. The next week brought urgent work helping Victoria frame a chicken coop before the winter winds arrived. Isabella held boards while Caleb hammered, their movements synchronized without discussion. The work was hard but satisfying, building something to last. "You two make a good team," Victoria observed, bouncing baby Mary on her hip. Isabella flushed. Just neighbors helping neighbors. But that night, word spread through town like wildfire. Morgan had filed claims on the land surrounding Willow Spring. The maps at the land office changed overnight, boundaries shifting like cards in a rigged game. At Pike's saloon, Morgan's men grew bolder. When Isabella passed by with supplies, they called out crude suggestions. Caleb materialized from the livery stable, not threatening but simply present. "Gentlemen need something." His voice carried the particular calm that preceded violence. The leader, a rat-faced man called Doyle, sneered. "Just appreciating the scenery. Grant, man can look. Can't he? At the mountains, sure." Caleb stepped closer to Isabella. "The lady's not scenery." Doyle's hand twitched toward his gun, but Caleb had already shifted his weight. "Ready. Tell you what," Caleb said reasonably. "You boys leave Miss Santos alone, and I'll break those Mustangs penned behind the saloon. Save you the trouble of getting stomped." The men laughed nervously and dispersed. They'd seen Caleb work horses patient but immovable, like water wearing down stone. That evening, around the campfire, Isabella sang without being asked. Not a saloon tune, but something older, about winter roses and promises kept. Her voice carried across the camp, pure and strong. Caleb sat transfixed, understanding why men might fight to possess such beauty and why it couldn't be owned. "My mother sang that," Isabella said afterward. "Said it was about finding strength in bitter seasons. Your mother was wise." "She had to be." Isabella stared into the fire. "When you're powerless, wisdom's all you got." Children from the camp chased fireflies, their laughter bright against the darkening sky. The contrast struck Caleb innocence, persisting despite the harsh world surrounding it. "I wasn't always good with children," he admitted, watching Samuel and Mary play. "Scared I'd break them somehow." "You're gentle with horses," Isabella pointed out. "Children aren't so different. They know when someone means them well." The next morning brought troubling news. Victoria's fence had been cut, her few cattle scattered. The message was clear: those who opposed Morgan would suffer. But at Sunday service in the small clapboard church, Isabella noticed something changing. Where before people whispered separately, now they leaned together, sharing concerns and plans. "Fear makes folks mean," the Reverend Albert Douglas said from his simple pulpit. "But courage is catching too." After church, Caleb and Isabella helped search for Victoria's cattle. They found them grazing near the river, drove them home as a community. Isabella riding borrowed horses like she'd been born to it. Caleb directing the operation with quiet efficiency. "You could have been a rancher," Isabella told him as they guided the last steer through the gate. "Maybe we'll be yet." He touched the map in his pocket. "If we can keep the water free." That night, an early winter storm threatened. They worked together to move the camp's horses to shelter, secure wagon covers, bank fires safely. In the crisis, their partnership felt natural as breathing Isabella anticipating needs, Caleb providing steady strength. When Samuel Washington took a bad fall from a spooked horse, they doctored him together. Isabella cleaned the cuts while Caleb set the twisted ankle, their hands working in concert. Through the long night, they took turns watching over him, sharing quiet conversations about dreams deferred and hopes maintained. "What do you want?" Isabella asked during her watch, the question soft in the darkness. "Land that's mine, horses, maybe fruit trees by the creek." Caleb paused. "Someone to share it with." "That's all." "That's everything." He met her eyes. "What about you?" "To sing because I choose to, not because I have to. To cook for people I care about. To never owe anyone anything again." Her voice caught. "To stop running." Outside, wind howled like a chorus of lost souls. But inside the makeshift shelter, warmed by the fire and their growing connection, something new took shape, not yet love, but its foundation, built on shared work and mutual respect. By morning, the storm had passed. Fresh snow covered the world's harsh edges, making everything briefly beautiful. Caleb and Isabella stood together, watching the sun rise over the transformed landscape. "Storms reveal things," Caleb observed. "Show what's strong and what's not." Isabella nodded, understanding he meant more than weather. The coming conflict with Morgan would test everyone. But looking at their community, Victoria singing to her children, Samuel limping but laughing, Chang sweeping his store's entrance, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. The notice appeared overnight, nailed to posts throughout Sweetwater. Water usage fee required, by order of the Willow Spring Development Company. Morgan's signature sprawled across the bottom like a claim on the future itself. At the general store, ranchers and farmers gathered in angry clusters. $1 a week per household. Frederick Chang translated for those who couldn't read. More for livestock. That's theft, someone spat. That's business, Morgan corrected, entering with 2 hired guns flanking him. His beaver coat gleamed despite the dust. Progress costs money. Friends. The railroad brings prosperity, but infrastructure needs investment. Caleb stood near the counter, studying the notice. Willow Spring's been free since before memory. No man owns what God provides. Morgan's smile could have frozen July. Law says different. Grant filed proper claims, paid the fees. That makes me owner. You trespasser. He paused, letting the threat settle. Though I'm always hiring good horsemen. Shame to see talent wasted on principles. That evening, Pike cornered Isabella outside the bakery. He produced a yellowed paper from his coat, her father's signature scrawled beside her own mark from when she was 17, desperate to save him from men who broke bones over bad debts. Contract says you owe 3 more years, Pike said, tobacco juice staining his whiskers. Your daddy's debts don't disappear because he did. I've been paying, Isabella protested. Every month. Payments changed. Pike's eyes crawled over her. Morgan wants entertainment for the railroad investors coming through. Refined men expect refined pleasures. You'll sing for them, serve their drinks, be accommodating. I'll die first. Pike laughed. No need for dramatics, just business. Though if you refuse. He glanced toward the camp where children played. Accidents happen, especially to folks without protection. After Pike left, Isabella stood trembling in the alley. Not from fear, but from rage, the kind that burned cold and patient. She'd spent years running from men who saw her as property. No more. That night, the unseasonal storm the old-timers predicted arrived with vengeance. Snow fell sideways, wind screaming like all the devils of perdition. Caleb and Isabella worked through the night, helping families reach shelter in the church. Thomas and Sarah Johansson, recent Swedish immigrants, had gotten lost trying to reach town. Caleb found them near frozen, their 2 children clutched between them, while he carried the family through the blinding snow. Isabella prepared hot broth and blankets, her steady presence calming their terror. Tack, Thomas whispered through blue lips. Thank you. Through the long night, they tended the half-frozen and frightened. Reverend Douglas opened the church doors to all, regardless of faith or origin. The building groaned under the wind's assault, but held a metaphor Isabella didn't miss. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving Sweetwater buried under 2 feet of snow, beautiful and deadly. It covered both righteous and wicked ground equally, but it also revealed tracks Morgan's men had used the storm's cover to move through town, marking doors and taking notes, cataloging their enemies. Samuel Washington observed, leaning on his crutch. The cut on his head had healed but left an angry scar. At Victoria's homestead, they found her chicken coop smashed, the birds scattered or frozen. Warning, she said quietly, holding Mary close, for sheltering folks during the storm. Something shifted in Caleb's face, the patient horseman replaced by the former soldier. Enough warnings, he said. Time to organize. The meeting convened in Chang's storeroom. Caleb, Isabella, Samuel, Victoria, Chang, and a dozen others who'd suffered Morgan's squeeze. They spoke in low voices, aware that walls had ears and Morgan's money bought many listeners. Can't match him gun for gun, Caleb said plainly. But we got other weapons. Truth, for one. Unity for another. Isabella pulled out a small notebook. I've been tracking every forced sale, every cut fence, every accident. Names, dates, witnesses, evidence. Victoria added her own list taxes suddenly reassessed. Loans called in early. Shipments mysteriously delayed. Chang produced ledgers showing price manipulation. How Morgan's company store crushed competition through underselling, then gouging. What good's evidence when he owns the law? Someone asked. He owns the local law. Reverend Douglas corrected. Federal marshals are different. Telegraph office in Cheyenne might interest them, especially regarding mail theft and interstate commerce violations. They made plans quiet, careful, but determined. Isabella would keep her scheduled performance, buying time while they gathered more evidence. Caleb would organize night watches, preventing more accidents. The community would share resources, ensuring no family faced Morgan's squeeze alone. This is dangerous, Isabella warned. He'll strike back hard. Already striking, Samuel said. Least now we're striking too. As the meeting dispersed, Caleb walked Isabella back through the snow-muffled streets. You don't have to sing for them, he said quietly. We'll find another way. Sometimes you fight by refusing, sometimes by pretending to yield. She touched his arm. Trust me, I've been performing my whole life. One more show won't break me. But her voice carried doubt. Pike's threats weren't idle. She'd seen what happened to women who defied such men. Yet looking at Caleb's steady presence, at the community rallying despite fear, she felt something stir, not hope exactly, but determination. I won't let them own you, Caleb said, the words carrying weight. Nobody owns me, Isabella replied firmly. Not anymore, but... She hesitated. I'm scared. Caleb. Not of them, of hoping for better and being wrong. He stopped walking, turning to face her in the snow-softened lamplight. Being scared's just sense, but you're not alone anymore. None of us are. They stood close, breath visible in the cold air. Around them, Sweetwater slept under its white blanket, but beneath the peace, currents of conflict stirred. Morgan had drawn his lines. The community had drawn theirs. Between them lay Willow Spring, its water still flowing free for now. That night, crows gathered in the bare cottonwoods, black shapes against white branches. Their cawing carried across the frozen prairie like warnings or war cries. In her wagon, Isabella practiced old songs, the ones her mother taught her about freedom and sorrow intertwined. In his cabin, Caleb cleaned his rifle and studied maps, planning patrol routes. The first skirmish in the water war had ended, but everyone knew from Morgan in his heated hotel suite to the poorest farmer shivering in a soddy that spring would bring the real battle. When the snow melted and the grass greened and the cattle needed water, that's when principles would meet profits in earnest. Isabella touched the hidden contract in her trunk, feeling its weight like shackles. Soon she'd have to choose safety in submission or danger in defiance, but watching through her frosted window as Caleb made his rounds, checking on neighbors, ensuring all were safe, she knew the choice was already made. Some things were worth the risk. Freedom, dignity, the chance to build something lasting with someone who saw her as partner, not possession. The water of Willow Spring would flow free, or they'd dry up trying to ensure it. The crows cawed once more before settling for the night, and darkness wrapped Sweetwater like a shroud. But in homes throughout town, lamps burned late as people counted what they had, what they'd risk, what they'd fight to keep. The real storm was coming. The decision tore at Isabella like winter wind through thin cotton. After 3 sleepless nights, she made her choice. She would sing at Pike's Saloon one final time, using the performance to buy food and supplies for the struggling families. Practical necessity over principle, survival over pride. When she told Caleb, standing in the dim light of Chang's store, his face went still as stone. You're giving them what they want. I'm buying time, Isabella countered, though her voice shook. The Johanssons have nothing. Victoria's down to boiling bones for soup. One night of singing means a month of eating. It's not about the singing. Caleb's hands clenched. It's about them thinking they own you. Let them think what they want. I know the truth. Do you? The words came out harder than he intended. Because from here, it looks like you're walking back into the cage. Isabella's eyes flashed. Easy for you to talk about cages. You're a man. You've got choices. I've got responsibilities. They parted in anger. The first real fracture between them. Caleb stalked off to check his trap lines, needing the solitude of open prairie. Isabella returned to her wagon, hands trembling as she pressed out her one good dress. The night of the performance. Pike's saloon glowed with unusual splendor. Railroad investors from back east filled the tables, their gold watch chains catching lamplight. Morgan held court near the stage, regaling them with promises of profit from the tamed frontier. Backstage, Pike cornered Isabella with new papers. Small addition to our agreement, he said, breath sour with whiskey. Exclusive contract. You sing only here. Live in the rooms upstairs. Entertain special guests when requested. Isabella tore the papers without reading them. I honor the original deal. Nothing more. Pike's face mottled red. You'll sign, or what? She stood straighter. You'll hurt me here tonight with witnesses. She smiled coldly. I'm not 17 anymore. Benjamin, I know my worth and yours. On stage, under the harsh light of oil lamps, Isabella sang differently than before. Not the playful dance hall tunes they expected, but ballads of loss and endurance. Her voice filled the room like smoke, beautiful and suffocating. The investors shifted uncomfortably as she sang of graves beside the railroad tracks, of families scattered like seeds on bitter ground. Caleb stood at the back door, unable to stay away, watching her up there dignified despite the circumstances. Turning their victory into something hollow, he understood. She wasn't surrendering. She was fighting with the only weapons she had. After the final song, Pike tried to grab Isabella's arm. The gesture looked friendly to the crowd, but his fingers dug deep. You owe me another set, he hissed. I owe you nothing. She pulled free, addressing the room. Gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the performance. It's my last... Morgan rose from his chair. Now, Miss Santos, surely we can negotiate? No, the word rang clear. I'm done negotiating with men who see people as property. She walked toward the door, spine straight despite the trembling in her legs. The crowd parted, unsure whether to stop her. At the threshold, Caleb waited, his presence solid as a wall. Their eyes met his apologetic, hers defiant but grateful. Pike lunged forward. You walk out, you'll regret... Caleb stepped between them, calm but immovable. The lady's leaving. Outside, snow fell soft as ash. Isabella's breath came in gasps, the cold air sharp after the saloon smoke. Caleb draped his coat around her shoulders without speaking. I'm not some princess who needs rescuing, she said, but leaned into his warmth. I know. He pulled her closer, voice rough. That's why I burned for you. The words hung between them, unexpected and raw. Isabella turned in his arms, searching his face. What? You heard me. His hands framed her face, gentle despite their strength. I burn for you, Isabella. Not because you're delicate or need protection, because you're fierce, because you stand when others kneel, because you sing truth in rooms full of lies. She kissed him then, there in the alley with snow catching in their hair. Not a fairy tale kiss, but something real, desperate, and warm, and tasting of promises that might be kept despite the odds. When they broke apart, reality crashed back. They could hear Pike raging inside, Morgan's calm voice planning reprisals. The war wasn't over, it had barely begun. They'll come for us? Isabella said quietly. Let them come. Caleb's arm stayed around her. We've got something they don't. What's that? Each other, and a community that's tired of being squeezed. They made their way through empty streets to the church, where families waited anxiously. Isabella distributed the money she'd earned, not as much as hoped, but enough for bare necessities. Victoria wept with relief. The Johanssons tried to refuse their share until Isabella practically forced it into their hands. "We take care of our own," she said firmly. Later, in the relative safety of Chang's back room, the Resistance Council met. Samuel reported that Morgan's men had been mapping water sources, planning to fence off access points. Reverend Douglas had telegraphed federal authorities but received no response yet. "They're moving fast," Chang observed. "Spring comes, they'll control everything." "Then we move faster," Caleb said. He spread out his hand-drawn maps. "These are the water sources I've found over the years. Some aren't on any official survey. If we can secure even a few." They planned through the night, rotating guards, hidden supply caches, communication systems using Isabella's network of freight haulers. It felt like preparing for war because it was near dawn, exhausted but determined. Caleb walked Isabella back to her wagon. "I'm sorry," he said. "About before, I was scared," she finished. "So was I." "Am I?" She touched the fading bruises on her arm where Pike had grabbed her. "But I'm more scared of giving up." "We won't give up." He kissed her forehead. "We'll find a way." But even as they parted, both felt the shadow of coming violence. Morgan and Pike wouldn't accept defiance. The community's unity threatened their entire system of control. Retribution would come swift and hard. In her wagon, Isabella found a note slipped under her door. "You've made your choice. Now live with the consequences." No signature needed. Pike's handwriting was distinctive as a brand. She fed the note to her stove fire, watching it curl into ash. Let them threaten. She'd spent her whole life afraid, negotiating with fear, making bargains with men who saw her as commodity. No more. Outside, dawn broke gray over the prairie. Somewhere, coyotes howled their morning prayer. The world turned on, indifferent to human struggles. But Isabella felt a change inside herself, small as a seed, but growing. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever came next, she'd face it standing up, with Caleb beside her and their community around them. The water wars were coming to Sweetwater, but so was spring, and with it, the chance for new growth. Isabella touched the window of her wagon, tracing patterns in the frost. Soon enough, the ice would break. The question was, what would grow in the thaw Morgan's empire of control? Or something freer, more honest, more just? She knew which one she'd fight for, and for the first time in her life, she believed they might actually win. The community kitchen took shape in the abandoned church at the edge of town. Isabella organized the women and children with military precision, some hauling water, others gathering firewood. The smallest ones tasked with sorting donated vegetables. Smoke rose straight up in the still morning air, a beacon of defiance. "We feed whoever's hungry," Isabella announced to the assembled volunteers. "No questions about politics or payments. Empty bellies don't care about taking sides." Victoria Harrison kneaded bread dough alongside Sarah Johansson, their hands working in rhythm. Mary Chang taught the children to fold napkins from newspaper, while her grandfather, Frederick, donated sacks of rice from his dwindling stores. Caleb arrived with Samuel Washington and 3 other riders, their faces grim. "Morgan's men blocked the North Road. They're checking papers, turning back anyone they don't like." "Let them block roads," Isabella said, not pausing in her vegetable chopping. "Hunger finds a way around barriers." The kitchen became more than food. It grew into a gathering place where information flowed like water. Teamsters brought news from other towns. Mothers shared strategies for stretching supplies. Children played together regardless of their parents' origins. Their laughter a small rebellion against the fear Morgan cultivated. By the 3rd day, over 60 people had eaten at the communal table. Morgan's attempts to starve out resistance met the oldest human truth. People share food when times are hard. Even some who'd stayed neutral began donating goods, shamed by empty bellies in their midst. Caleb organized the night riders differently than expected. Instead of confrontation, they focused on documentation. Thomas Johansson, literate in 3 languages, recorded brands on cattle mysteriously moved onto disputed land. Samuel, despite his healing injuries, mapped every fence line that appeared overnight. They gathered evidence like squirrels storing nuts, patient, thorough, preparing for winter's judgment. Chang revealed a skill none suspected the elderly shopkeeper had worked for the Union Pacific survey teams. His detailed knowledge of property law proved invaluable. Morgan filed claims incorrectly. He explained, spreading out official documents. 3 sections overlap existing homesteads. Federal law supersedes his territorial claims. If we can get federal attention, Reverend Douglas added soberly. The plan formed slowly. They would compile irrefutable evidence of Morgan's land fraud, Pike's coercion, and the hired gun's violence. But delivering it to federal authorities meant reaching the territorial capital, a dangerous journey with Morgan's men controlling the roads. Then Pike made his move. On a drizzling Tuesday night, Isabella was returning from the kitchen when 3 men surrounded her wagon. She recognized Pike's enforcer, Jacob Thornton, a man whose dead eyes matched his reputation. "Mr. Pike wants a word," Thornton said, his hand resting on his pistol. Isabella clutched the knife in her apron pocket. "Tell Pike I've got nothing to say." Wasn't a request. They dragged her toward a waiting carriage. Isabella fought with the fury of a trapped wildcat, landing a solid kick to Thornton's knee before his partner pressed a chloroform-soaked cloth to her face. The world spun and darkened. She woke tied in the back of a freight wagon, rain drumming on the canvas. Pike sat across from her, examining papers by lantern light. "Morning train to Denver," he said conversationally. "Buyers there appreciate unique merchandise. Your debt will be cleared, plus profit for my troubles." "You're trafficking women now," Isabella's voice came out rough. "Business expansion. Morgan showed me the potential. Eastern appetites for Western exotics." He leered. "Though I might sample the goods myself first." Isabella tested her bonds rope, but poorly tied. Pike's arrogance would be his downfall. "Caleb will come." "Counting on it. Morgan wants him eliminated. 2 birds, 1 stone." Meanwhile, Samuel had seen the abduction from the livery stable. Within minutes, word spread through the community network. Caleb gathered riders while the women prepared not to wait and worry, but to act. The pursuit began at midnight. Caleb led 5 men along the railroad tracks, using Samuel's banjo calls and storm lantern signals to coordinate in the darkness. The rain helped, muffling their horses' hooves and limiting visibility. They caught up at Willow Creek Bridge, the wooden structure groaning under storm runoff. Pike's wagon had stopped. The bridge looked too dangerous to cross in the dark. Caleb didn't charge in guns blazing. Instead, they positioned themselves strategically. When Thornton stepped out to check the bridge, Thomas Johansson's lasso dropped over him from above. The man went down hard, his shout lost in the storm. Pike emerged, pistol drawn. "Show yourselves, I've got the woman." Isabella had worked her bonds loose during the ride. When Pike turned his back, she struck, driving her elbow into his kidney. Then, kicking his gun hand, the weapon flew into the darkness. The confrontation was brief and brutal. No theatrical shootout, just men grappling in mud, fists connecting with flesh, the desperate struggle of people fighting for their lives. Caleb reached Isabella. She broke free from the wagon. "You came," she gasped. "Always," he replied, pulling her behind cover as Morgan's reinforcements arrived. The federal marshal's appearance changed everything. Elijah Thompson, accompanied by 2 deputies, had ridden hard from Cheyenne after receiving Reverend Douglas's telegrams and documentation. His timing couldn't have been better. "Federal warrant," Thompson announced, voice carrying over the storm. "Morgan, Pike, you're under arrest for land fraud, coercion, and conspiracy. Morgan tried to bluster. This is territorial matter. Not when you're stealing federal land and interfering with mail delivery. Thompson cut him off. The evidence the community had gathered was overwhelming. Chang's surveys, the testimonies, the forged documents all pointed to a criminal conspiracy. The arrest wasn't clean. Shots were fired. Thomas took a bullet in the shoulder defending the marshal. 2 of Morgan's men fled into the storm, but when dawn broke gray and watery, Pike sat in irons while Morgan's empire began crumbling. Isabella stood in the rain, hair plastered to her head, dress torn and muddy. Caleb wrapped his coat around her, and she leaned into his warmth. Around them, their community gathered battered but unbroken. "It's not over," Caleb warned quietly. "Men like Morgan have friends. There'll be trials, appeals." "But we won this round," Isabella interrupted. "And we'll win the next ones too, together." Victoria and Chang approached with blankets and hot coffee. Samuel, despite his injuries, played a victory tune on his banjo. The Johansons supported each other. Thomas's wound bandaged, but his spirit intact. "We should expand the kitchen," Isabella said suddenly. "Make it permanent. A place where anyone can find a meal and friendship." "And the water?" someone asked. Caleb smiled grimly. "We file proper claims on every source not already legally held. Form a water cooperative. No one person owns it, everyone does." Marshal Thompson overheard. "That's legal, if done right. I know a honest lawyer in Cheyenne who'd help." As the sun finally broke through the clouds, illuminating the rain-washed prairie, the people of Sweetwater began to see possibility. The fight wasn't finished. Evil men didn't give up easily. But they'd proven something important. Together, ordinary people could stand against power and greed. Isabella looked at the faces around her, worn, worried, but lit with hope. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it. Not just love with Caleb, though that burned bright and true, but belonging to something larger. A community that fought for each other, that refused to bow or break. "Home," she whispered. Caleb heard and understood. "Yes," he agreed. "We're home." The weeks following Morgan's arrest brought cautious optimism to Sweetwater. The community kitchen's hearth never cooled, sending steady smoke into the spring sky. Children laughed over bowls of Isabella's corn soup while their parents planned the water cooperative's future. At the territorial courthouse, justice moved slowly but steadily. The evidence proved overwhelming. Chang's surveys showed clear fraud. Witness testimonies revealed patterns of intimidation, and Morgan's own records, seized by Marshal Thompson, documented his schemes. Morgan received 7 years for land fraud and conspiracy. Pike got 5 years for coercion and attempted trafficking. "Justice tastes different than revenge," Caleb observed, reading the newspaper account. "Quieter, more lasting." Isabella nodded, kneading tomorrow's bread. "My father used to say revenge was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. This feels cleaner." The water cooperative took shape through community meetings in the church. Caleb's hand-drawn maps became official surveys. Each family contributed what they could labor, materials or expertise. The charter was simple: water belonged to all, maintained by all, defended by all. Summer arrived with its usual beauty and severity. Grass grew tall around Willow Spring, now protected by legal documentation and community vigilance. They built a simple pumping station, its wheel turned by whoever needed water. A wooden sign proclaimed, "Free water for free people, keep it clean as your conscience." Isabella's outdoor concert became Sweetwater's Founding Day celebration. She sang not in a smoke-filled saloon, but under open sky, her voice carrying across the prairie. No admission charged, just families spreading blankets, sharing food, being neighbors. "Look at them," Victoria said, watching her children dance with the Johansson boys. "6 months ago, we barely spoke. Now we're family," Isabella finished. the kind you choose. The changes rippled outward. Young couples who delayed marriage for lack of prospects now exchanged vows. The school expanded, with Isabella teaching letters to adults ashamed of their illiteracy. Caleb trained horses for fair prices, his reputation for honest dealing bringing customers from 3 counties away. They faced resistance. Of course, Morgan's associates tried legal challenges, but the federal judge upheld the cooperative's charter. Anonymous threats appeared on fence posts until Samuel organized veterans from both armies into a peacekeeping force that discouraged midnight mischief. Funny how men reconsider violence when they know it'll be met professionally, Samuel remarked. Polishing his deputy's badge, Marshal Thompson had appointed several locals to maintain order. Autumn painted the prairie in golds and browns. The harvest came in strong, shared labor making light work. Isabella organized canning circles, teaching preservation techniques learned from years of scarcity. Nothing would be wasted. No one would go hungry when winter came. One evening, Caleb found Isabella at her mother's grave, a simple marker she'd finally been able to afford. She laid wildflowers on the dry earth, speaking quietly in Spanish. "Telling her about us?" Caleb asked gently. "Telling her I found what she always wanted for me," Isabella replied. "A place to belong. People who see me as Isabella, not as entertainment or property." "What else did you tell her?" Isabella smiled through tears. "That I found a man who burns for me not because I'm perfect, but because I'm real, who sees my sharp edges and doesn't try to file them smooth." Caleb pulled her close. "Your sharp edges are what cut through lies. Don't ever lose them." They married that autumn. Not in grand style, but surrounded by their chosen family. Reverend Douglas performed the ceremony at sunset by Willow Spring. Isabella wore her mother's repaired wedding dress. Caleb had polished his father's boots until they shone. The community provided everything else: food, music, joy enough to light the darkening sky. "Do you, Caleb Grant, take Isabella Santos to be your wife, to stand beside her in plenty and want, in justice and injustice, in peace and conflict, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Caleb said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who understood promises. "Do you, Isabella Santos, take Caleb Grant to be your husband, to stand beside him in hope and disappointment, in triumph and setback, in summer and winter, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Isabella replied, her voice clear as spring water. Samuel's banjo led the celebration. The Johanssons performed a traditional Swedish dance. Chang told stories of building the railroad, but choosing to build community instead. Even Marshal Thompson, visiting to check on the town's progress, joined the festivities. "I never seen a town turn itself around like this," Thompson admitted to Caleb. "Most places, once the rot sets in, it spreads. You folks cut it out clean." "We had good reasons to fight," Caleb replied, watching Isabella teach the children a Mexican folk dance. "And better reasons to build." Winter came early that year, but Sweetwater was ready. The community kitchen had become a permanent structure, expanded with donated lumber and volunteer labor. Root cellars bulged with preserved food. Neighbors checked on neighbors, especially the elderly and alone. On a particularly bitter night, with snow driving sideways, Isabella and Caleb sat by their own hearth in the small house they'd built near Willow Spring. The land was theirs now, legally bought and properly filed, but more than paper made it home. "Remember when we met?" Isabella asked, watching flames dance. "You couldn't control that horse, and I was covered in flour. I remember thinking you were the fiercest person I'd ever seen." Caleb admitted, "All 5 feet of fury." "And I thought you were another cowboy with more pride than sense." She laughed. "Shows what first impressions are worth." They'd learned to argue productively about money, about the cooperative's future, about when to start a family. Each disagreement taught them more about listening, about finding middle ground without losing themselves. Morgan's appealing his sentence, Caleb mentioned, reading a letter from the territorial capital. Let him, Isabella said firmly. We've got truth on our side, and time and each other. A knock interrupted Victoria Harrison with baby Mary, fleeing a chimney fire. Without hesitation, they made room, Isabella heating soup while Caleb rode out to help save what could be saved. This was community, not just sharing celebration, but bearing each other's burdens. By spring's return, Sweetwater had transformed from a town divided by greed into something rare, a community united by mutual aid. The water cooperative inspired similar efforts in neighboring towns. Isabella's teaching methods spread as former students became teachers themselves. Caleb's horse training operation employed young men who might otherwise have drifted into trouble. They planted trees along the main street, each family responsible for one, for shade, Chang explained. But also for memory. These trees will outlive us all, reminding future generations that people once chose community over conquest. Isabella touched her belly, where new life grew a secret she'd share with Caleb tonight. Their child would be born into a world still hard, still unfair in many ways, but also into a community that had proved ordinary people could stand against extraordinary greed. Home, she whispered again, the word meaning more each time she said it. Not just a place, but a people. Not just safety, but purpose. Not just love, but the daily choice to build something worth defending. The prairie wind carried the smell of growing things, of possibility, of spring's eternal promise that what seems dead can live again. Sweetwater had learned that lesson. Now it would teach it to others. One meal, one kindness, one act of justice at a time. Dawn broke like a watercolor painting across the autumn prairie. Frost turning grass to silver crystal. The whole town gathered at the new water station for the dedication ceremony. Victoria Harrison cut the ribbon with the same kitchen knife she'd used through all their struggles, now polished to shine. This water belongs to all of us, Reverend Douglas intoned, maintained by all, defended by all, free as the rain that fills it. The crowd erupted in cheers. Children raced to be first at the pump, their laughter bright as morning birds. Isabella watched from beside Caleb, one hand resting on her growing belly, the other linked with his weathered fingers. We did it, she whispered. We started it, Caleb corrected gently. Now we maintain it. The celebration filled the afternoon families spreading quilts on grass still green despite the season, sharing food that told stories of their origins. Swedish cardamom bread next to Mexican tamales, Chinese dumplings beside German sausages, America's promise made real in a shared meal. Isabella had organized everything with her usual efficiency, but differently now. Instead of serving others from obligation, she coordinated volunteers who served each other from choice. The community kitchen had 3 stoves now, donated by families who'd prospered under the cooperative system. Samuel Washington played his banjo while children danced. His deputy badge caught sunlight, symbol of law that served justice rather than power. The scars from his beating had faded but not disappeared, reminders that freedom required vigilance. Play the song about the water rights, someone called out. Samuel grinned and launched into the ballad he'd composed about their struggle, each verse chronicling another small victory. Voices joined in the chorus, even those who couldn't carry a tune contributing to the joyful noise. Frederick Chang had set up tables displaying the cooperative's books, every penny accounted for, every decision documented. Transparency, he insisted, was their greatest weapon against future corruption. His grandson helped, already learning that numbers could serve truth as well as greed. Thomas and Sarah Johansson demonstrated the new windmill design they'd developed, perfect for drawing water during dry spells. Innovation born from necessity, shared freely rather than hoarded for profit. Their English had improved remarkably, helped by Isabella's patient teaching and the community's acceptance. As afternoon faded to evening, Caleb stood to address the gathering. Public speaking still didn't come naturally, but leadership had chosen him whether he'd sought it or not. 2 years ago, we were strangers, he began, voice carrying across the crowd. Some of us hungry, all of us afraid. Morgan and Pike thought they could squeeze us dry like this land in drought. They were wrong. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Not because we were stronger or richer or smarter. Caleb continued. But because we chose each other over fear, chose sharing over hoarding, chose justice over easy compliance. He paused, finding Isabella's eyes in the crowd. She nodded encouragement, her faith in him steady as bedrock. This water station is just stone and wood and metal. It'll need repair, need protection, need care, like everything worthwhile. He gestured to the crowd. But we are what makes it matter. Every time someone drinks freely here, we prove that ordinary folks can build extraordinary things. The applause was thunderous. Isabella joined him as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Together they lit the lantern that would burn beside the water station, a beacon for travelers and reminder for residents. "I have something to tell you," Isabella said softly, as the crowd began dispersing to prepare for the evening dance. Caleb studied her face, noting the particular glow he'd been seeing lately. "About the baby?" She laughed, not entirely surprised he'd guessed. 3 months along, due in spring, when everything's new. He pulled her close, careful of her condition. "Our child will never know the fear we knew. Never wonder where the next meal comes from or whether the water's free to drink. They'll know other challenges," Isabella said practically, "but they'll face them with a whole community at their back." The dance began as stars emerged overhead. Fiddles and guitars joined Samuel's banjo, creating music that pulled even reluctant feet to movement. Caleb and Isabella danced slowly, carefully, her head on his shoulder. "Remember what you said that night," she murmured, "after Pike's saloon. That I burned for you. Do you still?" He pulled back to meet her eyes. "More each day, not the wildfire of youth, but the steady flame that warms a home, that lights the darkness, that lasts." She smiled, remembering her own words from so long ago. "I'm still no lady." "Thank God for that," Caleb replied. "Ladies don't build communities or fight injustice or teach children to read. Ladies don't turn fear into hope." Around them, Sweetwater celebrated. Marshal Thompson had sent word that Morgan's appeal failed. The evidence was too strong. The community's testimony too unified. Pike had attempted escape but was recaptured. His sentence extended. The threats that had shadowed their lives were fading like smoke. But more important than vanquished enemies were the bonds being forged. Young couples courted under watchful but approving eyes. Children played together regardless of their parents' origins. Elderly folks found purpose in teaching skills almost forgotten. The cemetery was tended, the past honored even as the future beckoned. "What now?" Isabella asked as the music slowed. "Now we live." Caleb answered. "We raise our child, train horses, teach school, keep the water free and the kitchen open. Show other towns what's possible when people choose courage over comfort." A shooting star blazed across the prairie sky, and the crowd pointed and cheered. Some made wishes, though many felt they'd already received more than they'd dared hope for. Later, in their small house by Willow Spring, Caleb and Isabella sat by the window watching moonlight turn the land to silver. The water station stood sturdy in the distance, its lantern a steady star at ground level. "We should expand the school," Isabella said thoughtfully. "Add a library. Books are like water, everyone should have free access." "Already planning the next fight?" Caleb asked, amused. "Planning the next build," she corrected. "Fighting's sometimes necessary, but building's the point." He took her hand, feeling the calluses from work, the strength in her small fingers. "Then we'll build. Whatever you dream, we'll make it real." "Not just my dreams," Isabella insisted. "Everyone's. That's what makes it last." Outside, an owl called across the darkness, and its mate answered. The prairie that had seemed so hostile now felt like home, not tamed, but understood, not conquered, but befriended. They'd learned its moods, its dangers and gifts, the way it tested character and revealed truth. The story of Sweetwater would be told in other places, inspiring other communities to resist exploitation and choose cooperation. But here, now, it was simply life, Isabella and Caleb and their neighbors writing a new chapter in the old story of the West. Not the myth of lone gunmen and savage wilderness, but the truth of ordinary people doing extraordinary things together. As sleep finally called them to bed, Isabella touched her belly again, imagining the child growing there. Boy or girl, they would inherit not wealth or status, but something better, a community that had proved love stronger than greed, courage more lasting than fear, and justice more powerful than any man's ambition. "Good night, my love," she whispered to Caleb. "Good night, my fire," he replied, and kissed her gently. The lantern at the water station burned on through the night, a promise kept, a future secured, a light in the darkness that no wind could extinguish. And in the morning, the work would continue, water drawn freely, children taught gladly, neighbors helped readily, the simple acts that, taken together, make a civilization worth having. The West was still wild, but in Sweetwater, it had also become home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of the Old West. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Caleb and Isabella's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who appreciate authentic tales of love, courage, and community in the American frontier. Until next time, partners.